think of history as stories about the past, but it's always about the future, in my mind.
The worst thing we can do is for our generations not to know where we've been. Somewhere, someone is going to want to know.
To see yourself in a place where history is captured and told, it has such power.
Power and archives are inextricable. Who decides what gets kept?
5 years ago, the kind of thing that I'm saying publicly in this documentary right now could get you in a lot of trouble.
The provincial archives have the power of life and death over events in BC history.
We're supposed to be neutral. That's not possible.
How can our own people, whether we're Indigenous, Black, people of color, how can we tell our own stories? Why can't we tell our own stories?
We were absent from so many places when actually we were there. We were present.
Nobody's saying it's your fault, but one needs to learn these things so you're not repeating the past.
What isn't archived? What is unarchived? What is forgotten? What is lost? What doesn't belong?
When we don't collect these things, when we don't make these records accessible, it doesn't get included in history.
I believe that all institutions, colonial institutions, need to be on the way for a revolution.
The time of reckoning has come.
Taking a walk down to the bookstore on a lonely, boring day for me. Can't wait to see my latest boyfriend. Under the covers, waiting to be free. Green thumbtacks and a pair of scissors. I sweat real hard till way past 3. Covering everything but the bedroom window with pictures.
My name is Ron Dutton. I manage the BC Gay and Lesbian Archives.
Hot magazine, like hard to dream, where books are seen, like some real pretty.
My strategy was to collect everything.
Oh, I love him so.
I don't say, oh, that's a good story, I'll keep it, and that one isn't, so I won't. I keep everything. Wet t-shirt contests at Numbers Cabaret, trivia, and you think, who cares? In 50 years, is anyone going to care? Well, yeah. What I've found is that has been a smart thing to do. We all have presumptions, we all have assumptions, we all have limitations to our knowledge. None of us can ever yank ourselves completely out of the historical moment to be utterly neutral in what we collect. This is the poster collection. There's a remarkable difference between what posters looked like in the 1970s and what they look like today. So these are all poor people postering. Simple, simple. They didn't have a lot of money to spend. I came to Vancouver in 1975, in my early 20s. I had just come out of university and 3 or 4 years of working at my first job as a librarian. I arrived in the big city for the first time, ready to let go. I wanted to get passionately involved with the politics of the time. The whole of the 70s and the late 60s had been a hugely political time. The women's movement is in full force. The anti-war movement against the war in Vietnam was explosive on campus. The Black rights movement in the United States was very, very much in the forefront of everybody's minds. And then, beginning in 1970-71, the initial movements of the Gay Liberation Front. People were picketing and they were forming organizations, they were publishing newspapers, they were writing manifestos. There were probably 8 or 10 gay rights organizations at that moment happening in the city. The Gay Rights Union, Gay Alliance Toward Equality, Lesbian Mothers Defense Fund. At the same time, there is a massive bar scene going on. So there is both the social and the political, and they're working together in tandem. Brilliant time to be young and gay. You were being suddenly, willingly out for the first time in your life, and it was intoxicating. So there was I in the middle of it all, but also with a sense that we were on the cusp of something new, that society was being pushed very hard and was going to have to make changes to the way that it regarded gays and lesbians, and that we were going to make that happen. I began to get really concerned about that because everybody was out there having a grand old time and no one was doing the filing. And everybody's busy, we have a demonstration, and then they move on to the next thing. They're not thinking about writing it all down so that this history we were making would actually have a record. So I simply began to do that. Every handout and brochure and newspaper article and poster that came to hand, tossing it in a box with a date on it. Very quickly, the box became 4 boxes and then 8 boxes, and I realized some sort of structure needed to be imposed on this material if it was going to be usable by anyone at a future date. So I began to do that. Gay Tide is the newspaper put out by the Gay Alliance Toward Equality, Gale Force. It's the newsletter of the Gay and Lesbian Educators of BC, a competitor from the Gay Games, a pennant from Team Berlin. Here is a Dim Sum Dykes bamboo triangle, which is a women's group of East Asian Canadian women. These incredible zines that are photocopies of material, poetry, raving. They're often really obscene, and they are always highly confrontational.
With community archives, it's the community stepping up and filling a gap that the other archives should have been doing. Most government archives are over 100 years old. Academic archives are usually at least 50 years old. So because we have this really old legacy, you're dealing with predecessors who were, in almost all cases, racist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, really like every kind of prejudice that you can have. So as a result, you're not seeing communities that have been historically oppressed represented in most archives.
Community archives do this tremendously valuable service of starting those grassroots archives. Are generally much smaller and more agile. They create a nucleus that we hope will grow and will last and preserve materials that need to be preserved.
I've been going back to those old newspaper databases, now available at home, and downloading material that relates to our lives, those little flashes or glimpses that try to tell you what it was like in 1940 or 1910 in BC. Here's a man from New Westminster, 22 years old, charged with a gross indecency and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor and 5 strokes of the lash. That was 1946. The thing that scars and defines in some odd way my generation and previous generations is that I was a criminal until I was almost 30 years old.
Transiency in his relationship.
I could have been arrested at any moment had it become a public knowledge that I was a gay person. justice system viewed you as a criminal. The religious industry regarded you as, at best, a sinner and more likely evil. And the psychological industry regarded you as being damaged or mentally ill. The other estate, which is the press, not only went along with it, but they became the agent by which those three oppressed you. Or they disappeared you so that you didn't exist in the public eye. And that was as damaging as anything not to be seen.
I'm a trans person with disabilities. I grew up my whole life never seeing people like me in textbooks or in museums or really in anything historical, let alone, mainstream media. And it wasn't really until I started to learn my history that I actually saw a future for myself at all. That's when my life changed, is when I realized that it wasn't that I was a freak that should die, but that I was a real person and people like me have existed for millennia. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Over here are clipping files. This file goes back to 1924. There are articles that would appear in the newspaper about somebody who got arrested for cross-dressing. The articles in that period of time always talked about them as some kind of depraved human being. And yet, somebody who was so isolated to think that they were the only person like them in the world would see an article like that and would save it. That's how lonely they were, that something like that was worth cutting and saving. Most trans people live the vast majority of their lives having very little contact with other trans people. Repeatedly, we hear from people that it's been really moving, it's been really important to them to see and touch these materials, and through them, to connect with their predecessors. Some people use the word ancestors. Occasionally, somebody will call them transcestors. But to be able to feel that connection by putting your hands on these materials that were in the hands of those people as well. It is moving and it's important.
See, this one I find actually really interesting because trans people have always had, obviously, a very antagonistic relationship with the cops. And you can see here, it's talking about, special ID cards. This is actually like a relatively common practice. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with carrying that kind of ID card, but it provided people with safety that they didn't have otherwise.
What is it like to see these up close?
Like emotional. Like it feels, often I feel that I have more of like a connection, like a true like spiritual connection with my trans ancestors than I do with like my actual biological ancestors. Like I don't think I would feel the same way looking at like my own family papers. Aaron and the Trans Archives is actually like why I went to grad school at all. I was looking basically at what careers are even available to us. And I mean, obviously things have changed in the 7 years since I came out, but even 7 years ago, it was pretty daunting to try and find any kind of field that wasn't like actively hostile to trans people. And so when I was, really trying to find anything, trying to find, any kind of information on, what trans people were doing, what kind of fields they were working in and stuff, that's how I found out about, the Trans Archives and Aaron. I knew I needed to learn some kind of new skill. And the fact that this place existed where, you know, our history was actually prioritized, really, was one of the impetuses for me to go to grad school and study to be an archivist. So being here was obviously really emotional. Meeting Aaron, who has been a hero of mine, was really emotional because it's kind of like I've sort of finally come full circle from being just like this kid in Toronto with like, I don't know, nothing, I guess.
Community archives are inherently unstable because they're volunteer run and they don't have the funding. The Transgender Archives is part of the University of Victoria Libraries. University of Victoria is an institution. We have all the resources of the University of Victoria supporting us, and that's considerable. We try to have one foot in each world. Many of the people that donated collections here kept things that were lifelines for them at the time. People were concerned that after their death, someone else would come in, see what they had, and they would think, well, nobody would care about this junk. This is garbage, and throw it away. And in fact, that did happen. And so people started to put their collections here because they felt like this is a safe place. This place will be here 50 years from now, 100 years from now. Community archives, there are some who have lasted quite a few years. You know, I hope that they continue to last a long time. But there have been many over the years that have folded. And there are those that exist, but every year we're not sure if we'll be able to continue to exist. And so the collections are precarious. What's going to happen to those collections?
For a South Asian Canadian who is an immigrant to this country, a fairly young immigrant to this country, I never really understood what an archive was until I started looking at the history of South Asian Canadians in Canada, and especially in BC. I started to find, large gaps in our history, whether it was through designed erasure or through omission or just through neglect. I found that there was large pieces of our history that were either not included or had just been forgotten. We were everywhere in BC. We were in small towns, we were in big cities, we were in institutions, we were working, we had children, we went to hospitals, but we were seen nowhere. But I'm an optimist, so I don't sit and wait for someone else to do this work. We just start. My name is Satwinder Bains, and I'm the director of the South Asian Studies Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley, and I manage the South Asian Canadian Legacy Project. I've been in Canada since 1975, and I've been through many iterations of my own identity. I came from India and I actually had rose-colored glasses on, and I thought Canada was ready for this young, brown, idealistic young person, and Canada was a country of information and everybody was waiting with open arms at the airport. It was a rude awakening that was not the case. I wanted society to see me as a holistic human, as a person with gifts, as a person with values, and I got pegged into a little square. I was seen as either a Hindu or an East Indian, terms I wasn't accustomed to. My terms were also racial slurs that were thrown at me. So I inured myself from some of that racism that I faced as a young girl. I had to find inside me a deep well of love, self-love, so that the racism that I felt wouldn't affect me to the point that I would harm myself. So finding your role in society takes time. To become a South Asian Canadian, where I believe My identity is important as a South Asian, but I'm as Canadian as anybody else. But my South Asianness also informs who I am. And it is a beautiful information that I carry with me that I don't want to give up. We are over 100 years in this country. But it's a moment right now where people are reflecting back and saying, wow, that was important. Not just the Komagata Maru, not just the big events, but the daily occurrences are important. Our position as minorities, our position as marginalized people, our position as settlers, displacing First Nations peoples as well. And this is all very new. I felt that the South Asian Canadian Legacy Project would be that vehicle that would allow me to record something. Prior to this, it was an isolatory work. I was doing it by myself. But to include more people, to put the message out to the community that we're coming, we want to listen to your stories. That legacy part is really critical. And unfortunately for us, we haven't had that legacy for a long time. That's amazing that she has all the names.
Yeah. When we don't collect these things, when we don't make these records accessible, it doesn't get included in history. I worked for 2 LGBT community archives before coming to SASE, and that's really what fueled my passion, but also my ethic when it comes to archives. And so I was really excited to work on the South Asian Canadian Digital Archive because it was an opportunity for me to do the kind of work that I entered the field to do, which was to make sure that marginalized people's histories aren't, erased.
Simple lifetime stories of our everyday existence prove to us as Canadians that we built this country as well. Even as settlers, we came in, we lived in small communities, and we built homes, and we belonged. Those simple, everyday, normal stories are not afforded to us. Any photographs you see are caught through a lens of very industrious people working at the mill or working somewhere. We are already 50 years behind.
Mayo Singh, and I believe it was 35 shareholders, bought this land in Paldi on Vancouver Island and established Mayo Siding, which was a mill, and it was very, very successful. But what made Paldi different was that Mayo Singh was South Asian. Many of the workers that were originally drawn to Paldi were also South Asian because at that time, it was impossible or almost impossible for them to work anywhere else. But then other communities were drawn as well.
It was an intercultural community. You had a lot of South Asian immigrants who moved there to work for Mayo, and a large population of Chinese Canadian immigrants and Japanese Canadian immigrants, and then white European Canadian immigrants as well, all living and working and growing up together in this town. And if you look at, especially like the school photos, that's very, very evident.
There are other camps with multicultural enclaves, but there was something special about Paldi that I haven't heard anywhere else. And it was just this spirit of love that existed always there.
Paldi is a very, very unique community. I personally don't know of anything comparable or any town comparable in the country. When we set out, I really, really wanted to make sure that we had some kind of documentation of Paldi, but I didn't know if anything existed. The Cowichan Valley Museum and Archives did have the Joan Mayo fawn, the Mayo Singh family fawn. That fawn is, for the most part, all of the research material that Joan Mayo gathered. So some of the records in there are her own, but then there's also a lot of collected material from, community members or people in Paldi that, gave her photos or she took a photo of a photo. So I drove out to Vancouver Island, I picked up the boxes, and yeah, we've been digitizing and we're just finishing up processing and description right now.
Joan was both a historian and a collector. she married into a South Asian Canadian family, and then she adopted that family as her own. She was accepted by the community, but there was a time I'm sure she must have felt like she was just looking inwards from outside. You know, it's one thing to take the photograph, but then to have a system where they're collecting it, which I would love for Joan to tell us, you know, why she did that.
My name is Joan Mayo, and I married the oldest son of Mayo Singh in 1953. No, sorry, 1951.
What does it mean to you to know that the South Asian Legacy Project is digitizing all of the photos and the videos?
I just think it's a wonderful thing. And it just shows how close we all were, still are. Even though most of them moved away since the mill closed, we're still all very close. It's like family. It's one big family.
That type of archive is missing for us. We don't have a complete history of a town. We have snippets. And while people are trying to stitch it together, you know, the evidence is missing. I know that the archive is just being digitized, but I think beyond the digitization is the storytelling. We are lucky that we can take Baldy, one small geographic city in the big province of British Columbia, and say, within that city is the lived experiences of South Asian Canadians that you can tease apart at so many levels and find beneath it all kinds of community living. That, to me, is the beauty of Baldy, the gift of Baldy, the gift of the person who collected those photographs, who kept them, who put behind them the dates and the names of the people. To us, that gift is, you cannot put a value to it. While Baldy's history is really known for the mill, the archive tells a different story. The archive tells a story of men and women involved in play and labor and home and tradition and events and marriages and births and deaths, how school kids went together and the moms got to talk to each other and learn each other's food, and there was conversation going on even if they didn't understand each other. And it became this microcosm of Canadian society.
So let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go home. Home is when we speak. Home is where you are. Home is where I belong. Home is what we made. Home is in your heart. Home is where. Home is when we speak. Home is where you are. Home is what we made. Home is in your heart. Home is where I belong.
We came from India in June of 1967.
I was born in Paldi, in India. Arrived in Paldi Airport here, from Paldi to Paldi.
We lived here from 1950 to just before 1970.
I was born here in Paldi.
Born and raised in Paldi.
That was wonderful.
Unforgettable.
All the kids were together all day long.
We hung out as much as we could from morning till dark.
We had a nice little group hall, and we had community activities.
We were young, everybody knew everybody.
We didn't feel like we came from India and were new here. It was just like we were part of one big family.
A lot of us are still very, very close, very good friends.
We played together, worked together, cried together, laughed together.
This was our playground. This is the temple that I got married in.
East Indian, Japanese, Chinese, Ukrainian, Scottish, English. We thought this is how the world is.
Nobody's ever forgotten, I don't think, what they experienced here.
Everybody wants that remembered.
So our children can see it, and our grandchildren can see it, and their grandchildren.
I'd like people to realize that this little town was a legacy.
And that everybody should get a chance, like we did, to grow up in a place like this.
Home is where I belong. Home is you, my friend. Home is in the song. You listening to home.
So this one's really full. We have so many.
Beautiful.
I love this one, but unfortunately, we have no idea who any of these people are. Yeah.
These men look like they're, you know, new immigrants to
Yeah.
the country because they still have all their turbans, and it looks like after the war because one of them is wearing a uniform. Oh, this is an amazing.
Yeah, I love that one. I think these are the only photos we have of these kids.
Oh my goodness, is Mahinda Doman. Mahinda is quite famous now as a writer and an author. Playing in the backyard under the
Washing. Yeah, I like that one a lot
Well,
too.
you know what, Magnus? There are very rare photographs of men holding their babies. Usually it's the women that are holding the babies, but for women to be given center stage and he's in the back. Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And then this is a birthday party, and that's Rajindi right there.
Oh, you can see the resemblance.
I know, it's so easy to identify him. Like, there's him again. It's so obvious.
Look at this.
Yeah, I also I want to put that one in the carousel too. It's such a great photo. It's so BC too,
so
right?
BC with
yeah.
the logging. And the log is so large.
Yeah.
It's half of him. It's both emotional and just a gift, the overwhelming sense that this is a gift from the past. This sense of discovery. And I get emotional about it because we have so little. It's all in our memories. It's gone with our pioneers and our elders. Those stories are gone. Those images are gone. But for someone to have saved all this and then many years later, let's say 70 years later, we're opening a file and we see these photographs, we can say, this happened. There was a house and people did live here and this is what they did and here's the evidence. You can keep talking about it, but until you see something, it's overwhelming.
Victorious, they traveled to get the photos
The
done.
worst thing we can do is for our generations not to know where we've been. It's interesting when you don't see your heritage reflected in either the curriculum or in community stories or in monuments or history as it is told. You realize that your heritage and what you're leaving behind hasn't been important to someone. How did that happen? How come we were absent? I really want to question authorities and people in power to say, what gave you that kind of immunity to erase us?
British Columbia, the most lovely country that can be imagined.
I am third-generation Canadian. I am tied to Vancouver Island because my father was born in Cumberland. My grandfather, Lumnit Pun, he was a head taxpayer, and he came in 1890. When I teach, I talk about my name and how people make judgments by how they know you. So if I say Imogene Lim, they're more likely to think, maybe born in Canada. But if I said my Chinese name, Lam Mojan, they would immediately say I'm a foreigner. And that's part of the larger issue about being Asian in Canada, that being constantly identified as being the perpetual foreigner.
A shocking new survey shows just how prominent anti-Asian racism is in our country.
One of the most difficult things for me, a place like Canada, is that exclusion was successful. And people are seen to be unwelcome latecomers. But that's an acceptance in this story, the success of exclusion.
It's because of you, Chinese people.
Says the unidentified woman in this video.
That normal Canada, the Canada that they are disturbing, is a white Canada.
Get out of my face! I'm Canadian.
Scapegoating Asians, blaming Asians, that has had a long, enduring life in Canada. For much of the history of Canada, what went into an official archive, it was really in the support of state stories about Canada being this place where some people belonged and other people didn't belong. Every record is about Chinese being a problem and not belonging. And we're going to document that again and again and again. We had laws on the books for most of our history that basically put the power of the state behind white supremacy. One of the most effective ways of thinking about history is to think about silences. What is not collected by those in power, what is left out, makes it really difficult to tell stories because you're encountering the missing.
On behalf of the people and government of Canada, we offer a full apology to Chinese Canadians for the head tax and express our deepest sorrow for the subsequent exclusion of Chinese immigrants. Gana Dai Dohi.
We can't just say, okay, we apologized, we're all good now, but still, you don't show up in the archives. You can't unmake that. You can't recover the past, but you can recover a connection to the past. The surveillance of the Chinese, in a really perverse way, created archives of exclusion. So the Chinese who don't show up in other records, and yet in police records, as they are being again targeted for breaking laws that were only applying to them. We can actually get a fairly rich story of what social life was like. I get a little secret joy out of that. It's sort of like, you thought you were doing this, but you're not as smart as you thought you were. The process of silencing makes a lot of noise. And once you try to look for the process of erasure and silencing, what you start to see is traces, the noise everywhere.
Classic painting of the photograph that everybody sees of Cumberland's Chinatown. So this would be the two main roadways, and so you've got the fire hydrant, and that's always people's like, oh, did you see the fire hydrant? So it's a marker point between the two roads, the upper road, the lower road. So think about, like you're in this place and they actually had houses all along here. And when you look now, all the water is just right up here. Chinatowns, they get erased, they get burnt down, populations move. Oh, here's my uncle. So like Nanaimo's, it burnt. Duncan's, it was redevelopment. Cumberland also burnt. Part of me is like, wow, this is really beautiful. But then you think, oh, this is where my, family came from. And I'm hearing the kids in the background. I'm thinking they could have been the kids from my parents' generation, like people playing out and the sound of voices. Because there's, if it wasn't for that background of the kids, it would be silent. So there's something about the silence of the trees and sort of the majesty of nature. But this was a bustling location. When you're doing this kind of research, you're building on a number of clues. So you're being the detective, right? But there might be fire insurance maps. There might be business directories. And then you look at the landscape. So you see how it's like a little bit raised up there? So I'm thinking how they had a garden sort of up on the hillside. I'm thinking, it's like there's a bit of a plateauing up there or a ledge type piece. ethnobotany. You've got the ethno, which is looking at the sort of cultural use, and the botany, which is the plants. And it's a reminder of who was located here earlier, that their presence is no longer present, so they've been erased except for the plants that remain. With the Chinese community, lots of times you see bamboo to remind people of the homeland. If you look at this, we're not talking like just planted bamboo. This bamboo has been around for some time. And my suspicion, without going through land titles to look at the record, is that somebody of Chinese ancestry probably lived here. For me, bamboo and watercress, because of the sort of poking around that I've done here, is like, oh, that's something to look for. My friend who lives in Departure Bay, she said, like once a year, this family comes, they fill a garbage bag of whatever's in the ditch, and then they're gone. But she says they do it every year, so I go look in the ditch. It's watercress. Departure Bay was an area that had farming. So even if there were not land owned by Chinese, they would have been labor. When you have just the tops, you could just do a quick stir fry with garlic. Very good. Just with this, then season it with a little soy and sesame oil. It's perfect. The Chinese presence is found throughout BC and basically across Canada. You can smell the mustiness of this. So this says place names of British Columbia. So when you start looking at this list, it has names that might be recognizable to you, but then there are those small places and you say, why is that important? Like, why is it in this book? They have things like Athrum. It's like, I'm not even sure where Athrum is, right? There are other places that clearly were significant enough to be in this book. And as a reminder, the book was printed in 1897, printed in Vancouver. The fact that you have these places that were identified in this book is telling. Those places are not what people think of and say they were Chinese or Chinatown there. This is all about that erasure of the significance of those small town places. For some people, they think there's that dichotomy: Indigenous people, First Peoples, and then European settlers. And they don't think of the non-European settlers that were here early on as well. If you avoid the evidence that's right there, you get to say, nobody else was here. Yes, Indigenous peoples were here, and then it was us, and there was no one else in between.
If you want to say something is important in the past, then you will make your own archive. You need your own archive. Objects and things that are significant, even if they are ephemeral or lost in time, you can recover them by giving them meaning in the present.
As people come in, the first thing they'll see is actually this dragon head, which we think was used as early as 1930. Behind the dragon head would be a very long fabric where people underneath it would be dancing. Right at the very beginning, people would ask, oh, so why does it have to be a Chinese Canadian museum? Whatever you want to do, why can't it be a part of something else? And I guess I would say that, first of all, if people had recognized that it was important, other places, other institutions, other whatever, I think it would have been done. having a dedicated institution means that those stories are being told from the community's voice, from the people's voices, not interpreted via several other layers, that there's a real resonance to the community. Countering racism, anti-Asian racism, needs to start with broad education, which is very much a role of museums. The Chinese Canadian Museum specifically related to Chinese Canadian history, but the museum is not just for Chinese Canadians. It needs to be a museum for everyone.
Do we have this at home?
The past is not a closed book. It's almost truism that each generation makes their own past.
I fight.
But we determine the meaning of the past right now. Those who are leaving things in archives are those who have an eye to how they will be understood when people in the future look back upon them.
And sausages.
What does this say?
This says Chinese public school.
So to me, that's what's so interesting about archives. This is what's so interesting about history, because it's always about the future in my mind. It's about what we project forward as how we want to be remembered.
And what does this one do?
This says Chinese Benevolent Association. 中華會館.
What does this mean?
It means Chinese people come together and they work together. It's a group of Chinese people that work together.
And so let's remake the meaning of the past to fit the future we want now.
This vault's about 11,000 square feet. This quadrant is a mix of various kinds of special media, including a lot of our photographic prints, a lot of oversized prints. We're the final home for any records of permanent value from the city, but we complement those records with records from organizations and individuals, from families, and from collectors like Ron.
Can you walk us through what it was like to decide to put your archive in a government institution?
It was a wrenching, to be honest with you. I have been thumping this tub for 30 years, so there's a lot of people in the community who must be wondering what Ron is thinking. And that tub was this: these are our stories. We have to control the narrative. We have to be the ones who decide what our lives mean.
Looking through a series of old pics of drag queens, the city hoped to help identify some of the many unknown faces in a new gay and lesbian archive they've established.
Our history as a community, as a minority community, has been heavily underdocumented by historians.
Ron was quite famous in the community because of his collection. He was the person we would send researchers to if they had any questions about the gay and lesbian community in Vancouver. We didn't have a lot of the LGBTQ2+ community documented. Nothing as substantial or as far-ranging, as broad as the BCGLA collection. So this is a lot of Ron stuff of the BCGLA collection. So all of this bay, that bay, some other bays, and this, I believe, is mostly his subject files series. Any subject under the sun, Ron will have a file for it. As Ron got older, he started seriously thinking about where the collection could go.
I had to give it up because I'm desperately elderly, and I needed to begin to look further afield.
The gay and lesbian community had lots of reasons to not trust the city. So we were really honored when Ron approached us as a potential home.
I'll take that one. I shut down the main archive on December 31st, 2017. And we arranged a day, and within a matter of 2 or 3 hours, they stripped my apartment. Complete, and it just all went out the door in van load after van load because it was so huge. I'd gotten so used to it that I'd forgotten how very large it really was. Within a year of it being moved over there, suddenly a huge quantity of it was appearing on the internet. Something I could never have done. I'm eternally grateful to them. They are my friends. They are friends of our community. My own thoughts about this process of archiving were that while the politics was important and the changes of law were important and the changes in the social fabric mattered, there was a larger story there, which is about people and how they live, how they struggle through their daily lives, how they managed in times that were much more toxic than the world we were in at that point. And it hadn't ground them up. I wanted to tell their story. I wanted their struggle to be heard and understood and honored. That became the real mission, to honor the voices that weren't going to be heard otherwise.
So the people in this building in the provincial archives have the power of life and death over events in BC history. Because it's in this building where books and documents, originals are kept. There's no other documents like them. If they disappear, events in BC history disappear.
When I was a kid, there was a little local museum in my neighborhood. And there was a letter framed on the wall that was written by my great-grandmother, and she had won a prize, a national award, for writing this letter. To see it on the wall felt like there was a real connection for me to that place and to this person who had lived 100 years before me. It sparked this love of history and curiosity about the place where my family had lived for generations. I am incredibly privileged. I come from a white settler family that moved to Vancouver Island on that side of my family many generations ago and lived on stolen Indigenous land. And yet I got to see myself represented in this space. And so many other people don't see themselves represented.
The Royal BC Museum is pledging a major change after the release of a report today that found racism and discrimination was directed at staff inside the organization.
The board of the museum has met with the CEO, and they've come to agreement that Jack will depart later this month.
Racism and discrimination was found within the museum, including a culture of fear and distrust in the workplace. Management failed to properly handle those complaints, and a recognition the museum has outdated and offensive exhibits stemming from its 135-year history, telling BC's history through the lens of European colonizers.
These two reports show that we are not the museum we wanted to be, and we're not the museum we should be.
I think everybody internally realizes that there needs to be massive changes. Things don't move quickly, but I think they need to.
I think we hit the perfect storm of wanting so much to do repatriation, community relationships, changing the way we do exhibit, all these really positive, wonderful goals, but not actually having the structure to do it. It's very obvious to me that what we have is an organization that was structured in colonial times. And we see not just remnants of it, we see evidence of it. We take it for granted. It's taken for granted by a lot of people that these structures will just somehow work themselves out. They don't just work themselves out. You have to actually look at the policies, find out what is discriminatory in them, because many of them don't mean to be discriminatory, but they are. And they need to be very carefully focused on and consult with communities and change the way those policies are written.
We have the ethical responsibility to really understand how profound the changes need to happen. It's not just about adding things. It's not just about tweaking a couple of things. It's about real fundamental understanding of how to rebuild something with a completely different framework. I believe that all institutions, especially those who have recognized that they are colonial institutions, need to be on the way for a revolution.
How is it you are not accountable to Canadian society, to British Columbia? You know, where's the immunity in saying, this is how BC was built, without understanding that so many other groups of men and women gave their lives to this country, fought in wars for this country, died on building railway tracks and log booms, and yet they're absent. Absence was a very difficult thing to get around in my mind, and I think absence has been the thing that motivates me. I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated. We did an intervention at the Royal BC Museum, and I remember walking through, and we were given sticky notes and pieces of paper where we could intervene in terms of the historical trajectory of how they had shown British Columbia, and to say, we were here, and we were also here, but we are not reflected. It's almost like our presence was nowhere to be seen. I'm so proud of that intervention, because previously I'd never really imagined that my history could be present here. I kind of assumed that the dominant narrative was going to take over and I had to be relegated to the margins again, and didn't really question that positioning. But the intervention really allowed me to understand that I have a claim, and I can make that claim.
Yeah, that was so important that people actually feel rightfully there, right? Like they need to feel that's their space, and we need to do so much more work to make that moment last longer and do more things for the communities.
Yeah, we'd like some permanency. You know, we don't want to be temporary Canadians. We want to be permanent Canadians. We want to have that sense of permanency so that we're not asking for this over and over again. I'm hoping this will transform this space.
There has been a lot of different efforts to add bits and pieces of previously marginalized stories or previously erased stories. What we actually need to do is to ditch that binary model and really build a relationship to invite the communities in, consult and work with people who have different needs to share and build that common vision for the future. Victoria's Chinatown is a very important historic site that is at risk. A lot of different businesses, communities, and residents are losing their footing in that space because of all the issues with modern Chinatowns across the Americas, the gentrification, the urban development, and economic shifts. When the Victoria Chinatown communities wanted something done in their space, we wanted to really work with them and see what their needs were.
We want to show a new image of Victoria Chinatown, which is, the past and the present.
We want to blend the historical with the modern design. The exhibit is called Peering into the Past because we want to create those innovative small corners.
And this is the first project in collaboration with the Royal BC Museum, as well as Salient Group and the Victoria Chinatown Museum Society. And it's a storefront exhibit, which was curated by the Royal BC Museum. So our next venture will actually be an inter-museum where we could actually open the door and people could go in and see exhibits.
It'd be really good for us. South Asian Canadian Museum is just starting out. I would love to sit with you and the Vancouver people and just shoot the breeze. Let's talk to each other and maybe build each other through solidarity. I think institutions can help us develop some sort of ideas that bring us all together. And I never thought of that till now, that perhaps we need to talk more to each other and around one table. Because up to this point, there's been both a provincial, federal, Canadian kind of view about keeping people separate. I would like to see more solidarity from all kinds of community groups to come together to say our voices are greater if we are united. I think let's record this as well. Let's put this in. There is a systemic and system-wide failure, I believe, in Canada to really be inclusive. The status quo is very entrenched and embedded in our communities. It has at its core a very supremacist idea. It has at its core a place of privilege and power that is unquestioned. The status quo thinks that it has also clawed its way to its position and it's going to hang on. We're not a society that's immune from these kind of thoughts or intentional ideas, and to pretend that we are is disingenuous. Through colonization, the priority for history has been a European-centric history. We don't question why mainstream institutions don't reflect our presence. And when you make them uncomfortable, when you do question them, there's a lot of defensiveness. Let's be honest, people don't like to shift and make change. So the more open we can be to the questions that are posed to us, the better we will be as a society. The status quo needs to shift because the status quo is rotten.
Most Canadians know Sir John A. Macdonald as the country's first prime minister. His government created the Indian Act and established the residential school system where thousands were abused and generations of trauma followed.
In order to really commit to reconciliation, we need to remove the statue of John A. Macdonald from the front steps of City Hall.
History to me means a connection to the past. As a people, we always love telling stories. We're very much storytellers. That's just kind of how we share some of the history and some of the knowledge that we have. I was fortunate enough to have that connection in a living form of my grandmother, but not everybody does. And so sometimes knowing one's history is extremely difficult. I kind of wanted to get back involved with my nation and facilitate that connection. My name is Sandra Marion, and I am the Director of Culture and Heritage for Tahltan Central Government.
Tahltan Nation is a strong Indigenous people up in Northwest British Columbia. We have about 4,000 members that we know of. Close to 90% of our people now live outside the territory, and it's really important to ensure that our cultural information is accessible to them.
There's a huge connection between archives and land. The archives tells the stories about our ancestors on the land. Their use and how they survived. A huge part of our culture was survival. We have so many different ecosystems within our territory that each area had their own way of doing things depending on the terrain and the weather. And those stories that are recorded, they're important so that we understand how to use the land in different areas. So those stories need to be kept safe and preserved. Tahltan Central Government started in 1974.
Early on, we had started the Culture and Heritage Department, and one of the major tasks was to start building an archive so that we could house that all in one place.
A lot of documentation, especially around exploration in our territory, has accumulated over the years. but nobody else outside the organization could access those documents. And we get all kinds of documents. So these books, they're about different areas in the territory. And so this was one of their resource books from 1982. There's a picture of Treaty Creek. This is a book the TTC had obtained to use in their study for interviews about land claims. There's a lot of audio. Over time, there were multiple interviews conducted with our elders. During the fires of 2018, everybody realized, these documents are precious. So we wanted to organize and preserve to help support Tahltan identity and kind of reinvigorate it. We're taking resources and we're putting it back into the people in the form of culture and language. So we typically get a lot of different forms of media in here. We get cassette tapes with or without cases. Recently, one of our members, she had found some footage in her uncle's basement and brought it to me and said, hey, I would like to donate this. And this is where we have VHS, we have mini digital videos. We didn't have time to go through it properly right away. And probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, our multimedia director sent me a clip, and it was 27 minutes of my grandmother working on moose hide. We've never videotaped her as a family, and she passed in April 2020. And so to have her working on moose hide is incredible.
Scraper's blade. You what? That's what you call it.
It was just, I was blown away. The VHS actually has no title on it. So nobody knew what was on there until we digitized it and pulled it up. I was actually having a pretty rough morning. And so when I seen that, I was like, okay, Grandma, message received. This is what we're trying to recreate for our membership, is these moments. If there's information out there about your nation, about your family, anything to do with your identity as an Indigenous individual, you were supposed to have unaltered access to that information. And you're supposed to be able to bring it home.
And with respect to what we want from the RBCM and BC Archives, we need to go through formal channels. Those formal channels haven't caught up with existing legislation or changes to legislation that have happened in the past couple of years. Part of the materials at that institute are First Nations cultural heritage and property.
One of the biggest concerns about working in this field today is recognizing that the work that we do causes real harm and trying to find a way to mitigate that and to fix that, to ensure that not only do we not make those mistakes going forward, but to try and actually repair what was done in the past. I think it must just be down a couple bays. We're not anywhere near there yet. And a big part of it is engagement with communities that have the knowledge, never assuming that we know what's best or what the answer is. So this is the A.J. Stone album.
So this is from 1890.
1897.
Yeah, to 98.
To 98.
Like the near Spatsizi. And so this is like a really perfect item of what we would like to discuss of, bringing it home, given the individuals in these photos and being able, like you said, to have the physical copy and then discussing how to preserve it because it is from 1897.
Right.
But then allowing our own people to look at them and say, hey, that's my family member, that's who that is. And properly putting names to photographs that have been unnamed for over
Exactly.
a century.
Yeah.
These photos are all online, and our people have said, you know, that's my family member. I'm a descendant of that person in that photo, but then you look in this album and it's all numbers, and it's there's a level of like a feeling of dehumanizing
Absolutely.
the photos, because we have had access to them, but to properly label them and bring them home would be amazing.
Yeah.
This is Teltan before the bridge. There's markings in the cliffs.
She's right on it.
Yeah, I remember in the video with my grandma, she put that bar out in the blankets and climbed right up on it to.
I haven't seen the
to
video.
like
So she's
scrape it.
cleaning it,
She's
yeah.
scraping it.
And this is raised up above the ground?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's incredible.
It looks so cold.
Yeah.
The amount of stories that would come out of these photos from our people would be amazing.
So when we've been in conversation about repatriating material from the archive, our conversations have landed on the shared stewardship model. So we haven't actually repatriated the items, but this is new water for us. This is something that we haven't done. We're testing the waters, but something we'd be eager to enter into conversation with you about.
So for the Teltan specific archive, it'll be a huge asset in the sense of you can come home and you can physically look at these photos that involve your family and your territory. We talk about incentivizing our members to want to come home. Having things like this would be huge, because then they can come home and they can look at their history and they can physically touch tangible items of their own history. And I think there's an underestimation in the power of that. Whereas now we have to come to Victoria. And so being able to do that while on your own territory, it's huge. I love the accent of the blue in the middle.
Yeah, me too.
It's so gorgeous. They belong at home. They belong at home, and our people need to see them, and they need to work to remember. And it's just seeing pieces like this to connect to those pieces of today and to know that even though this is here, it wasn't lost. This artifact should come home though. This item from home should come home.
Photographs of men and women who helped. An institutional archive is governed by a lot of different protocols that come from a top-down view of narratives, that come from older European traditions, they come from colonial traditions. And not to say that all community archives don't do that. Collecting objects is, by nature, a fairly colonial thing to do. But the advantage of a community archive is it really is not beholden to those necessarily. It can be flexible. Grunt Gallery is an artist-run center in the Canadian model here in Vancouver, unceded Coast Salish territories. We have kept an archive of the programming history of this space in one form or another since the beginning. See, we don't keep artworks as in the physical work here. A lot of times we're talking about photo and video documentation.
Hello.
Hi there, welcome to Grunt. My name's Dan, I'm the archives manager here. Very nice to meet both of you. Glad to have you here. Come on in, take a look. So this is the office, and as well as our archive. The Grunt's been around since 1984, so we have a pretty extensive archive of all our programming over the years and exhibitions, performances, events, publications. And the video I have to show to you today can give you a little background. There's a Mi'kmaq artist named Mike McDonald who passed in 2006, but his tapes are held by an artist-run center called V-Tape in Toronto.
Okay.
And so I took copies of them out here as a sort of backup and to kind of connect some of his work with this space that he spent a lot of time in. I'll just bring up this video for you.
You remember the first year you come in the country, you know? What year was that?
1914 in spring.
1914.
In the spring in April we hit the
Wow.
Chesney.
Is that right? You know, I was born in 1908.
You were
April.
small.
I was small, yeah. I remember, you know, just like a dream there, you know. The strange people come in the country, you know, you kind of know the difference, you know, in the people there. I could remember it just like dream, you know.
He was one of the 4 or 5 men that started TCG, Tahltan Central Government. So I'm gonna ask the hard question. How do we get a copy? Because I can tell you right now, there's 2 very large families back home who would love this tape.
No doubt, no doubt.
Absolutely love it. I'm related to Eva through my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
She was huge in re-recording our songs, keeping the dancing going. All the tape we have now for that time is all audio. There's no visual at all. So this would be like the cherry on top.
A missing link kind of for that stuff.
Because I don't think anybody even knows this exists.
Yeah, I think I think that's a great opportunity. Like, our approach here is really just about caring for artists' work and stewarding the material. I'm not really into archival gatekeeping or any sort of way that we're like possessing. And in this case, it's even a degree removed from that because we're essentially just holding a copy of it. I mean, I would want to honor the commitments on Mike's family's behalf and V-Tape and the agreements that they've made. But I think it's definitely a conversation with them out there. But the way I see it, there's...
Do you have a direct contact that you might be able to introduce us to?
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
I met Frank when he was 1939.
I think it's really hard to think that we can watch this and not walk away with a copy and just hope that we have one.
Yeah, like I would feel comfortable giving you like a copy of this if you have a drive, or we transfer it to you or whatever. Like.
We all know that song. Before COVID, we had dances, and they would always sing this song at a dance.
Does it have a name?
Yeah, Kadajani.
Kadajani.
Oh, my sweetheart.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
I always talk about timing and how timing affects me in this job because it's always like slaps me in the face when things like this happen. Like you going over there and doing that work and then bringing it back and then us meeting you and just how all of that lines up. Like
it's pretty amazing.
The things that have to happen in order to get to where you are in this moment.
We could have easily missed each other, but that's not how it worked out.
Or you could have easily missed the tape.
That's true.
And picked something else. Like
that's true.
There's always these other forces in the back that just, I don't know. I believe in it, so.
I believe in it.
Through this work, things keep coming to us. I feel like there's this gravitational pull in some sort of like the force. It's this concept of ghost dancing and that we will start to bring things back to our people when our ancestors start coming back to us. And so having these tapes coming to us rather than us going looking for it just signifies, you know, you're in the right place at the right time and you're doing the work that needs to be done.
You may not know it, but the moment you are in has never happened before. It is an incredible, fertile moment to be alive, and we need to know what that feels like. And you have to tell us.
There is definitely an understanding that we're in a time of massive change. The institutional understanding is catching up to what people on the ground have been doing for years.
I felt really fortunate to be at this time, but I also find the task very daunting. It's only possible if we actually build a relationship, build a trust to figure out how we can reimagine our cultural spaces.
Why does everybody have to go to the RBCM? If you have a particular special item, why do you have to see it there? So it should remain in the community?
It's a process that's going to actually take active remediation because we value inclusion. We think we should create a society where people belong.
If we aren't actively collecting and preserving those records, they disappear, they're gone. And because we're only tackling this now in 2021, in a lot of cases, we're too late.
I would say one word might kind of explain what I feel at this moment is the word is impatience. I'm also very positive and optimistic about where we're going. We've just laid the foundation.
British Columbia and Canada are a work in progress as far as I'm concerned. We didn't hit the end at any point. I'm not even sure we're at the middle point yet. And I think that hearing what real citizens have to say to us and taking that as our lead, that's what's going to make the museum of the future. That's what's going to change what these places are all about. And I think that all citizens then are going to have an opportunity to learn the real histories, all of it, not just somebody's narrow interpretation of it, but all of it.